Boom! Welcome back to the 21 Convention 2021, Day 3, 15-year anniversary at 21 Summit in Orlando, Florida. Our first speaker of the day and our next speaker for the event is actually Liu Kang's cousin. You might know him from Mortal Kombat. Pretty awesome dude. He's also 2020 Artist of the Year, and for real, the Manosphere's greatest artist. He's actually personally introduced and recommended to me by Dr. Sean Smith, you guys saw speak on the first day of the event. He's a good man, and a great artist, and he's bringing back masculinity to art and the art world. He has an incredible story of what he's been through personally, coming out of the closet as a pro-masculinity artist. You can only imagine what that's like in the art world today. Anyway, without further ado, please let me welcome your next fighter, Arthur Quan Lee. Welcome, sir.
Good morning. So the subject of this presentation is on the social landscape. And I'll be expounding upon how the normalization of decadence and the irreverent climate we live in has greatly brought down our collective aesthetic standards. This presentation will crystallize what your common sense knows about the radical left, but from the vantage point of a classically trained fine artist. One of my goals here will be to dismantle the pretentious elitism associated with the art industry today. And I'll show you that while the pen is mightier than the sword, the brush or the instrument is mightier than the pen. Any medium, by the way, you can replace painting to understand this context. So I want you to first pardon the egocentricity a little bit. I'm going to share my story, because it's your story. In my own paintings, I'm most known for resurfacing masculinity, religious iconography, and traditional sentiments with a modern lens. Most notably is when I won Artist of the Year in 2020 by the Eileen S. Kaminsky Found Me Foundation. I've shown my work in Milan, Tokyo, Japan, really everywhere. It doesn't really matter. Here's a taste of my work. This is a heroic rendition of a Chili's. Notice the saturated color palette that... Can you fix your necklace? Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay. Yeah, notice the color palette. It pays this oblique tribute to Fauvism. This is a Slavic interpretation of a phoenix. The gestural mark making enunciates the intensity of my compositions that I'm going for. So within 3 slides, you can see my paintings are a conversation between the past and the present, where the ancients are placated in front of you with the new painting materiality available today. This was a scene when Beowulf was entering the cavern towards the archetypal devouring mother. And this is the painting in its entirety. So my central claim here will be that masterpieces are produced by masculinity and are more often undergirded by religious subject matter, and that the truest sense of what a fine artist has been, art historically speaking, is that of a spiritual servant. I'd like to read you a quote by Joseph Campbell now. Myths are so intimately bound to culture, time, and place that unless the symbols, the metaphors, are kept alive by constant recreation through the arts, the life just slips away from them. You know, there's a reason why Campbell repeated the adage of mother nature and father culture. Right? There's patterns here. And as we lose our pedagogical understandings, we deteriorate that social cohesion. This is why Dr. Jordan Peterson is so venerated today, because he's doing what Campbell did in the 20th century. And every man here has to take a symbolic role publicly for novelty to continue its evolution. So when you look at the ancients across all civilizations, they regard truth, the reason, good, and beauty as the fundamental building blocks of their society. Notice beauty is up there. And the truest sense of beauty is the sacred. And as our culture becomes more antithetical and polarized, you know, I just remind you that we've all been here before. Right? Every empire falls from the inside out, where the men become spoiled from the fruits of their fathers, and that same toxicity ventriculates onto the society's creative class. And the artist transitions from the preserver of truth to the spreader of vanity. When masculinity is not yielded properly in the arts, it is shoved underground to fester. And all we have to do is look at the most popular form of creative expression in young people today. And I don't know why not enough people talk about this as a case study, because it's a phenomena, which is hip hop. You know, if an overcompensation of masculinity ever had a name, it would be gangster rap. You know, the unconscious attraction, when you look at hip hop as a phenomena, is a freedom to be hyper-masculine. You know, the gold chains, being surrounded by lascivious women, you're pretending to be this musical warlord, essentially. And there's a place for it. When I'm exercising, if I'm intoxicated, there's a place for it all, but we have to acknowledge it for what it is. So in my journey as a fine artist, I had this obsession excavating the symbolic. I believe we've lost touch with paying tribute to our shared consciousness, and that the seeds of this counterculture that, you know, many are referring as this masculine enlightenment over here, they're planted in the wisdom of the ancients. That is to say, the canonical and pedagogical sentiments lie the answers to the ideological subversions consistently controlled by the mainstream media, academia, and Hollywood. This painting here is titled Agony and Ecstasy. We have two central figures in this composition here. First, we have the guardian food dogs. One has a ball under its paw symbolizing yin, the other has a cub under its paw symbolizing yang. These statues are traditionally given by elders to their children when they purchase new homes and are starting families. So they're pedagogically given, and the sentiment is to defend the family cohesion from the Mongols. So it's a very wonderful gesture. Interesting side note is celestial figures in Eastern mythology that are on the side of good manifest very darkly often, because their integration of the shadow is very evident in their mythology. But these ghoulish figurines, they love human beings. Their primary role is to protect children, actually. And on the other hand, we have the Madonna. This is the Pietà from Michelangelo, of course. You know, when the very feisty Donato Bramante was given the task of demolishing the chapel of Santa Petronilla, the first thing he did was remove the Pietà due to the symbolic weight that it carried. So the stubborn and inflexible man allowed thousands of years of art to be put into the rubble, but not the Pietà. And there's something significant in that. I'll give you a modern parallel. In World War II, when we were trying to give a statement to Japan, who was on the list for us to drop the nuclear bomb on? Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Kyoto. Kyoto has all that beautiful Japanese architecture, all that transcendent beauty and the history and philosophy associated with it. And all the wise men, they stood up and said, we will win by any means necessary, but we cannot destroy Kyoto. We need to remove it off the list. Because it's one thing to get to the other side, but if we get to the other side and we lose our sense of beauty, we lose our sense of humanity. And we need to understand that, especially today, with the direction of our climate. Notice the Virgin Mary here looks very youthful for a 33-year-old Jesus on her lap. It implies that a woman's value is deeply connected to her purity. So what happens if I put both of these figures onto one composition? It represents this universal archetype that any society that does not defend and preserve the archetype of the mother and child inevitably falls into hell. I think that this painting resonates with the 21 Convention deeply. I see a lot of pickup artists in the manosphere, and I think they're blindsided by a certain degree of hypocrisy. And I understand there's 15 years of baggage, but if we're going to allow the manosphere to evolve, we need to ameliorate this. In their private lives, they vote conservatively, but in their public lives, they show off this body count. And you cannot speak of social cohesion on one hand, and on the other hand, lead your brothers and sisters astray. It's a logical fallacy. And we need to address this if we're going to allow the manosphere to evolve. You're welcome. Oops. It's funny when I talk to the new atheists that dismiss religious models as if materialism has the tools to decipher the mystical. I see this island here with exhausted resources. And the ferry boat that gets us to the other side is Greek reason, Judeo-Christian values, and masculine romanticism. And the radicals are hacking down this method of transportation. They're exhibiting a lack of gratitude in any perspective whatsoever. But fortunately for us, when you study the Christian apologetics in the 1800s, they talked about how the only thing more beautiful, even to the everyday man, than the opposite sex is your religious experience. And anyone who has had those linguistic connections, or have had a mystical experience, or have a tasteful psychedelic experience knows what I'm talking about. This is one of my more popular paintings today. It's titled Apex. We have central warriors and authorities and conquerors around the world. The author of The Art of War, Sun Tzu. This is an unknown samurai, but the preserved condition implies he's very high-ranking. William Wallace on the left. Julius Caesar at the bottom. Genghis Khan, of course. Kim Il-sung, god of naval warfare in the East. Surrounding these authorities are apex predators. We have the brown bear above Wallace, the soaring hawk, the killer whale at the bottom, and this explosive red Siberian tiger that's in your face. I'm sharing my paintings with you guys because the same source that I create from exists within every man in this room. And I get great excitement awakening that latent fire. You know, when I said that masculinity is what produces masterpieces, I mean specifically your capacity to endure suffering, interpret it, analyze it, and publicly share it with your artistic means. Your risk-taking, your leadership qualities, these are all alpha male traits you can channel to take novelty to a higher place. I'm going to show you some quickly now. This colossal youth sliced in half is a very fitting representation of the times. This is another popular painting of mine titled Rebirth. I often regard Moses, Christ, and Buddha as the three greatest alpha males of our history. It's one thing to lean towards our physical gifts. You know, it's another thing to validate your status by getting attraction from a lot of ladies. But it's another thing to go within and integrate your shadow or sin. That takes real gonads. This painting was acquired by the Special Forces Foundation, organization dedicated to supporting Green Beret veterans. The vast majority of my collectors are military veterans with an entrepreneurial spirit. I'm honored to give some light to the brave men and women of this country. So 10 years of consistent effort in the gallery scene, exploring philosophical subject matter, traveling museums across the world for inspiration, and training under some of the most respected masters in the industry did me very well. See, I'm 20 in that photo. Typically at that stage, artists are competing to get into group shows, and they get rejected at like a 10-to-1 ratio. But I never had that problem because of the nerve I was hitting. You know, I knew very early on I wanted to play in the major leagues. And I found myself getting big and small solo exhibitions regularly. And as word got around, some of the players in New York City started to collect me. And I started to enter their social events as well. And I'll be clear here. I really kept to myself the entire time, even amongst these people. And the closer I became to these elitist ship of fools, the more the true colors revealed onto me, though. You know, in full transparency, guys, I was in social camouflage, nodding as a yes man, in fear of losing my financial security, realizing I'm losing something far more sacred in turn. You know, the degree of wokeness and social justice anesthetizing the art industry can't be repeated enough. I've had an art director who wanted to have an initial meeting with me at a Black Lives Matter rally. I've had dozens of critics suggest that I depict more female or LGBTQ figures, implying they'd write about my practice further. But nonetheless, I found myself awarded Artist of the Year internationally. And this is Berlin, Mexico City, you name it. All the top art cities. I got a lot of attention for this. But in that exact same week, one of 6 galleries I was consigned with in New York City told me to take a white supremacy survey because they wanted a more inclusive roster of artists. And her logic was to recognize my unconscious male bias towards systemic forces I may be unaware of. I was labeled adjacent white upon its completion, just so y'all know. We all understand cerebrally what the radical left is doing, right? Marxism in different Christmas packages, BLM, feminism, what have you. But if you work in the arts and entertainment, where the gatekeepers literally demand the bending of the ideological knee, it's a very different thing. So I found myself at this crossroads here. Do I continue to participate in this circle jerk logic, or do you challenge the sophist? Who, by the way, are paying my bills, right? And I thought a lot about this as to why so many good men do not speak up and stand up for what's right. And I'm starting to realize it's heavily circumstantial. Because as men here, we're all here on the journey to improve. And we don't need everyone to like us. We can toughen our leather. That's fine. But it's one thing to be hated. It's another thing to be hated and poor. And if they look at your 2 kids and they say, well, I can castigate your source of income, you're going to listen to them. And that's actually the circumstantial reality as to why people are not speaking up. I've thought about this a lot, because we can ante up. But if they can make you jeopardize people you're taking care of, it's a whole different story. This is why I became an artist, right? To preserve. This is my father here. How can I look into his eyes? Senior pastor, military veteran, rooftop Korean, president of the Council of Korean Churches. From the perspective of the gallery vampire. And today, that is a nexus of cultural Marxism, atheism, unconscious determinism. Go about your whims. And, as the Bible says, the only greater pain a man faces than losing a loved one is abdicating his moral responsibility. Because art, like morality, consists of drawing the line somewhere. So at this point of the story, I was just poking the hornet's nest. I shared my disdain for CRT, feminist misandry, shared my conservative predilections. That was all there. And I kept this professional cushion so I can keep working with these art dealers at a safe distance. And one of the interns in the Lower East Side said that, Arthur, we're selling your work, so at the end of the day, you're still salvageable, right? Salvageable. Until I started speaking up for the 45th president. This is where things got rocky for me. I went to this dinner party with the purpose of schmoozing, and the curator says, we have all these Black Lives Matter artists, and we want to do a show with you, group show, to commemorate the Stop Asian Hate movement. And she expected me to be giddy because of these slanted eyes. And she said, what do you think about it? How do you feel? I said, I think it's very odd that blacks assaulting Asians based on race is white supremacy. And there's 3 things you should never disparage in this industry, right? First is the LGBTQ. They're the most privileged people today, right? Second is BLM, and last are the feminazis. So she thought she could checkmate me. Well, what do you think about Black Lives Matter? The sacred cow. And I stated, I remember how weird this was, because I made this commitment to be real. So I remember how strange this moment was. I said, I think Black Lives Matter is a modern blackface, where a bunch of white liberals go on the streets using the black identity to push their liberal agenda. Like, how do you think that relationship went moving forward, right? Some of you will call it bridge burning. Some of you will say, that's bridge burning, Arthur. You shouldn't do that, right? But I made this commitment to just let go and let God. And I've had dozens of these interactions with many of the dealers I worked with. And 1 + 1 is 2. This is a microcosm of what occurs with Kanye West, Regina Carano. This is what happens if anyone is a masculine conservative and wants to use their artistic medium, whether it's comedy, fashion, painting, what have you. If you're yielding your medium towards the logos and want to preserve tradition, they will castigate your income. And in full transparency, being placated with these people has put me in a transition phase. Lower East Side, Soho, New York, they want nothing to do with me. New York City Antifa has regularly threatened and harassed me. And all these articles that previously venerated and praised me have all been taken down. So I'm completely independent now. And let me encourage anyone here that's creative, fuck the record labels, fuck the galleries, and fuck the managers, right? You became an artist because you love the medium, you love the artistic medium, and if you can be canceled, you have to live under their shadow. You cannot truly be free with your pursuit. But with that said, there's so many young people who want to use their artistic means for the good, who are just lining up towards the Leviathan. They're all going in to be influenced and poisoned. So what are we going to do about this? But like I said, all the answers are in the ancients. So if we're going to go forward, we want to first look back again. So I'm going to show you guys 6 works of art produced when the arbiters were masculine, the gatekeepers. And I mean specifically the Medici family, military generals, and wealthy patriarchs. And then I'm going to show you guys 6 works of art in today's intersectional landscape. And we're going to play the quiet game here because the picture is worth 1,000 words. I want you to exercise the art of very conscious looking. Notice your process of articulation, the architecture, your standards. Just experience the art. Enter postmodernism. You read that? You get the idea. Preposterous and trivial. How do we go from the divulging of the logos, encapsulation of the sublime, rendition of some of our deepest archetypal realities as food for the soul, to a banana duct taped to a wall, selling for $150,000 in Art Basel 2019? Well, it's because, as the Russians say, a fish rots from the head down. And I'm not going to even get into the money laundering component or the demonic artists venerated by the political elite. It's a much larger cultural issue that we, the people, even acknowledge this garbage as anything but insulting to our intelligence. Another way to say this is politics is downstream culture. And this sentiment has also been echoed by Michael Savage, Dennis Prager, And I hate to say it, but the majority of, I don't want to just say conservatives, but anyone who acknowledges and protects freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, and the family, they just repeat this as an empty mantra and are not active participants. Let me reiterate that. My conservative and traditional values are nested on aesthetic and sentimental reasons first. And you have to be able to justify it to the same extent as policy implementation on welfare, taxation, abortion, what have you. Like, you should be a conservative because you don't want your daughter to have a septum piercing, have blue hair, and be 300 pounds, right? You know that at a gut level. But when it comes to the conversation, we go into this echo chamber where we just stack red pill data and just throw it into each other, and it's not effective. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's not going to get the job done. We need to be a part of the culture. Because romanticism is nested in traditionality in the first place. And more often, the praised aesthetics of the time will give you hindsight of things to come. Beauty is not in the eye of the beholder. Yes, there are cultural and biological differences of taste, but beauty at an instinctual level is defined as identifiable boundaries refined to the nth degree. Look at a bodybuilder, look at a beautiful sports car, a marble sculpture. And there is relativity in there, I understand, but the refinement, the commitment to that, that's something that needs to be harnessed. The degeneration of beauty comes from one thing, actually. And what has been pushed down our throats since the baby boomers took charge? Political correctness. Political correctness is not just a tool to shut right-wingers up. Political correctness is ultimately the propounder of relativism. And relativism is not having the conscientiousness to distinguish the pieta from the levitated mass. To give some further context, the levitated mass is regarded as our generation's pieta. 10 million of taxpayer dollars to be acquired by LACMA. Relativism's central claim is that objective standards and expectations belong in the trash. And I'm telling you guys right now, and we're going to break this down, there are institutional roots as to why this is. So if you look at the 1800s, all art education was like atelier-based art training. It was like any other trade school, right? You want to be a mechanic, you want to learn plumbing. What do? You go to somebody who knows the skill, and you apprentice under them. But the advent of art universities are a completely different creature, and it's nested in the Frankfurt School. So in 1983, John W. Murphy of the Frankfurt School publishes Art and the Social World through the Studies in Soviet Thought, a study into Marxist aesthetics and its intellectual heritage. Art and the Social World is what all the art critics and theorists that are in the universities today use as a foundation. It's all nested on this. It's built upon this foundation. According to Murphy, the role of art should transcend representing conditions of beauty and truth towards a practice of what is deemed as socially beneficial. Art should serve as a political arm rather than a religious one. You fast forward to the top 5 art universities today. They're all being taught by radical postmodern ideologues on the left. The first person to catch wind of this was American cultural critic Tom Wolfe. So this story is pretty interesting because Mr. Wolfe was a lover of art history in New York City when the art world was going through this renaissance. He walked into this gallery in Soho, and he saw all these blank canvases. Usually, an artist produces a series, it takes maybe 2 to 3 years. The curators and critics come to the studio. We determine what works fits most cohesively based on the theme. We work out a statement. That's usually the go-to template. But he saw all these canvases, so he got excited. He walked in and he goes to this front desk girl wearing her all black, ponytail, pretty enough where you want to talk to her, but she definitely studied a liberal arts degree, so she has a little snarl in you. That dissonance was there, that typical image. He walks in and says, look at this artist here. Put all this work up. He's already getting ready for the series. He's planning it this ahead of time. Who is this artist? What is he producing? And she looks at him and says, no, this is the art show. This is the art show. These are white canvases with white paint on top of it. It's very bold and daring. And he's confused, because art is supposed to have cultural value. She looks at him. Oh, you haven't read Greenberg. You haven't read Clement Greenberg. This is your problem. He goes, oh, okay. So he gets a book by Greenberg. He goes up to his loft. He finishes his book. He comes back down and totally trolls her. Oh, it's the purity of the painting materiality that makes it transcendent. It's pure art. The purity of it is what makes it. And so why are you able to charge it at this rate? And in his bewilderment, she believes him. She goes, now you get it. Now you understand the art world. This is what, we're doing a new fold here, right? So Wolf's primary claim here in the painted word was that the American art movements from 1945 to 1975 was the religion of the educated classes. If you want to understand one of the great weapons of the radical left, look at the art gallery. They're doing a lot of underground stuff there, and this is where a lot of them meet. Abstract expressionism, pop art, and minimalism were just different denominations of the modern gallery attempting to replace the church. The heretics in today's fine art world are those who expose that the emperor has no clothes on. In other words, that those who see the culture for what it is, mere philistinism backed by second-generation liberal guilt of the upper class. This is an important thing. Like today, those who supported Wolf's claims were insulted as fascists, bigots, and racists by the students of Rosenberg, Steinberg, and Greenberg. Sounds pretty familiar, right? While I agree with Mr. Wolf and his fantastical literary style of writing, I don't think he went deep enough, though. And I don't blame him, because no one could have predicted how the decadence would proliferate with social media and technology. The logical conclusion of this never-ending avant-garde reframing of high art is elitism, yes. So by nature, those who will consolidate in this industry are those in the anti-American elite. Agreed. But who did the Kulturberg associate themselves with? Who were the intellectuals? Who were the academics? Who supported these art gallery gatekeepers? Radical Marxists who spoke of feminist misandry against the patriarchy. Before we look at the numbers here, I want to make one thing very clear, though. We're not blaming or attacking women because there's so many powerful female artists. That's not the point. You're missing the point if you think that's the case. It's the absence of masculinity that is the problem. We need this balance. I can't tell you how many masterpieces and amazing work of art there are from men exercising their romantic instincts selectively. There's amazing, tremendous beauty that's generated just from that source. But it's important to understand that when masculinity leaves a window, aesthetic standards will plummet. I showed that photo earlier with my girl and I with the Trump hat. There's layers of an onion to this. It's not Trump per se, right? You peel that, and that's conservatism. You peel that, it's traditionality. You peel that again, it's masculinity. You peel that again, it's standards. We're the ones who can uphold those standards because we're the ones conscientious of boundaries. We have that territorial system, and that applies psychologically as well. And that also applies to the artistry. So let me prove to you that there's no men in the art world today. Women earn 70% of Bachelor of Fine Art degrees and 75% of Master of Fine Art degrees from leftist universities in the United States. This is from the National Museum of Women Artists. In 2016, the globally recognized art website Artsy did a study of 33,000 artists and found that women in the arts did not experience the motherhood penalty in their careers. 22 Convention's gonna love this. In other words, women in the arts consciously choose to avoid bearing children and becoming mothers, freeing up all their time to have that vehemence towards masculinity. In 2018, art museum staff demographics showed a vast majority of women employees, and by 2021, these same women are running all the museums. Feminist Art Coalition, National Association of Women Artists, Women Made Gallery, Women Art Guild, Guerrilla Girls, the Feminist Art Project. There are hundreds of art collectives dedicated to supporting this anti-masculine frame in literature, art, you name it. I saw one of your faces when I said that when masculinity leaves a window, aesthetic standards plummet. This is something I believe in. And you're probably thinking, how can you make such a claim? That's too much of a wide thing to say. Well, we don't even need to look at the art. We can look at the women themselves. So we're going to look at students who went to liberal art school or studied art education. All right, and check this out. Some of you are going to want to chuckle, but that's fine. But there is a serious tone to this as well. You know, what if this was my sister? You know, what if this was your daughter, God forbid? Probably wouldn't be your wife, because you wouldn't want to deal with that. But let's have a look here. Oops, we forgot this one. But you know, I don't even blame them, because this is what they're reading. The Cosmopolitan used to be a housewife magazine. And you know, the whole trope that the men use acrylic and oil, the women use watercolor. The ladies would paint in watercolor, and they'd submit it to Cosmopolitan, and then the best one was getting the cover. It was a beautiful sentiment. Now you have this sphere. Total chick, the other lover, whatever you want to call it, right? This is what has happened. This is the decadence I'm talking about. And speaking of reading, you should judge a book by its cover. The overall sentiment that I'm trying to relay to you guys here is that we need to put a handle on our optics. Every time I see someone on the right and the left have a conversation, the right gets the spreadsheeting, the pie charts, stacks up this, again, red pill-driven data, and 90% of the time, they just talk to each other, right? What does the left do? They don't even bother with that, and they're effective. They have absolute ownership of big tech, academia, the gallery, Hollywood, and entertainment. Those are all spheres of influence. So they're getting all the young people. They're influencing everyone who is not so nested in with the data. We're going to do an exercise here, and I'm going to prove to you right now, right here with the social experiment. I'll prove my point. Anyone who can recite to me the 152nd line in the Constitution, raise your hand. Okay. Now I want you guys, if you can, to finish the lyrics of this melody. Okay? It seems today that all we see is violence in movies, and that's culture. That's culture. Culture, data. We need these red pill-driven men here. We need them. We need these stoic guys here. Because then if they want to argue with us on that table, we got that. But if we don't participate in the arts actively, we're doomed. We are doomed. Okay, I want to end this a little tastefully, so I'm going to quote one of my heroes here, Sir Roger Scruton. Rest in peace. When art becomes merely shock value, our sense of humanity is slowly degraded. The culture of the civilization is the art and literature through which it rises to consciousness of itself and defines its vision of the world. So let me show you guys some hope, because there are artists who are trying to fight for what's right. They're trying to preserve our tradition. This is Edward Nippers. He depicts biblical stories with all the new modern painting techniques with so much movement and breadth. It's a beautiful thing. Li Hongbo, he paints with classical standards, with paper, and he draws you in by bending reality. You can unfold them. Alex Gray in the Cosmo community. Now, I don't like how left-leaning he is, but at least he's making spiritually oriented art, so that's halfway there. And he's done, in regards to bringing art back to the sacred, he's contributed quite a bit. Eric Armisek, biblical realism. If you look, it's important to say while I'm on the subject, the greatest artists are Christian for a reason. This is not just, it's not a coincidence. Art that points to a transcendent morality, that's the good stuff right there. James Jean, resurfacing aesthetics from the East with modernity. Mr. Tung Han, more classical sculpting. I could have shown you hundreds of artists that I know, and if I didn't show some of my good friends, I'm sorry, I have too many to pick from. Bottom line here is that when femininity is left in the arts, in the aesthetics, you get aesthetic relativity. When masculinity comes into the picture, it introduces universal standards or hierarchy. And that is the dissonance that we need to ameliorate. Men have to participate in the arts. Let me give you more specifics. So my professor always suggests to people who do not have any art experience, who wants to just get their feet wet, take your family, take your kids, and learn the ceramic wheel. Make the bowls and plates that you literally break bread and eat together. It's a hell of a familial glue, and it's very affordable, and you get a taste of the aesthetic experience. That's one option. I've heard him say this many times. If you're in a blue state, you got a lot of galleries. Go in, check it out, and challenge the status quo. If you see this vague, miasmic horse manure, it might be horse manure, if you see this stuff, ask somebody that works there, what is the cultural value of this? And maybe there is a context that you don't know. Who knows? Don't go in with hate, but you must be willing to challenge the status quo, because these elitists, they will talk down to you, and you have to dismiss all that, because people's wisdom is only as deep as their experience, and these people just have vanity and narcissism and narcotics, really. Join the Genesis Council. I started this art collective for all the artists who want to take the culture back. We have art classes, we have yoga, we have a writer's circle, we have a book club, we have all these different learning resources where we can consolidate and support each other. There's nothing like this. So look, we have to return to tradition, restore the sacred, and make some art. I probably should have started with this. But what is the functionality of art in the first place? Let's go to base reality. What is the purpose and function of art? The point of art is to fortify the values you believe and are fighting for. You purchase some art, you collect something, you put it up on your home, that energy and aura permeates to your whole family and your home. The investment is insurmountable. And I think a problem with people on the right side of the aisle is they look at every investment based on an ROI. How many digits does this add to my bank account? Don't you want to have your hands on the wheel of actual culture? And I leave you with one saying. This is a sentiment that I have echoed upon in my whole practice inside the studio, that tradition, my friends, is not the worshiping of ashes, but the preservation of fire. Thank you, guys.